There we go. Well, welcome. How cool it is to see you all, some old faces and some new faces. This is our regular third Thursday conversation, primarily for leaders of new Episcopal communities, but also leaders of redeveloping congregations and diocesan leaders and others who are just curious as to what some of the conversations are that are going on in the church. We meet pretty regularly on this third Thursday, and those of you who have been around for a while, you'll know sometimes this takes a little bit more of the form of not exactly a training, but an outside speaker. Sometimes it's a bit more of information passing along, especially when it's new Episcopal community grant season, which we're probably on the verge of, but not quite yet. I know that many of you have questions around that. And then today we're taking another perspective, which is just a bit more of learning and wondering and question sharing, wisdom sharing. We just finished the year 2022, and I just thought it'd be nice now that we've got record pushed on here to maybe just reflect back a bit on what was a pretty unusual year. And what some of the learning and what some of the wisdom that was gathered amidst this circle of wise ones might be. So I thought I would start us off with just a short reflection, kind of to center us a little bit. And then my colleagues, Steve Matthews and Tom Brackett and I, we've been having this conversation in our team meetings. What were our learnings from 2022 for a while now? So we're kind of prepared to go first to offer those out loud. So we may offer 2 or 3 of our primary learnings each. And then we'd love to open both the floor and the chat box to hear back about some of the things that you have learned, maybe primarily around this work of missional leadership, of church planting, of congregational redevelopment, of learning to love neighbors, of the future of the Episcopal Church. But if there's any other kinds of learnings you'd like to throw in there as well, we would welcome them. But to give you some time to think, let me open us up with a reflection, and Tom, Steve, and I will go first. Does that sound okay? Good. Okay, I found myself the other day, just as a prelude to this reflection, Googling theology of adventure. I don't remember why I was doing that, but I actually found an article that a friend of mine had written, Adam Borneman, on the theology of adventure. And he had a couple of quotes from Stanley Hauerwas, the theologian, that just really struck me. So I'll read these aloud and then I'll put them in the chat box for you. Hauerwas says, "What we do when we educate kids to be happy and self-fulfilled is to absolutely ruin them. Parents should say to their kids, what you want out of life is not happiness, but to be part of a worthy adventure. You want to have something worth dying for. It's awful when all we have to live for is ourselves. That's what the gospel reveals to us. The good news tells of the adventure that humans have been made part of through God's grace, through Christ, and through the church. Remember when you got a chemistry set rather than a bicycle, and you thought, I hate this thing. But one wintry day, you started playing with the chemistry set and discovered that it was really interesting. Suddenly, you were trained to have wants you didn't know you should have. That's what Christianity is all about. It's an adventure we didn't know we wanted to be on." An adventure we didn't know we wanted to be on. That just really strikes me. I wonder, Tom and Steve, could we just go round robin, and would you share some of your learnings from 2022? Maybe we'll go in order. Tom, I wonder if you'd be willing to go first. So Tom, Steve, and then me. And maybe, maybe that phrase, an adventure you didn't know you wanted to be on, helps frame some of these learnings a little bit. Tom, would you be willing to go first and offer up a learning?
I would. And I say thank you, first of all, Katie, for inviting me into this conversation that you so faithfully host. And thank you to each of you for showing up. I'm looking at your faces and realizing that here in this digital gathering space on Zoom, there's such wisdom here. So I have to start by saying so much of what I'd like to share, I've actually been learning from you all, from you. And my first point, I actually felt so affirmed in this because of a conversation with you, Clive, about what community looks like and how community acts in your ministry there. And so my first one that I learned, especially around launching new ministries, is something you might expect to hear from Michael Curry, but I'm going to say it in a slightly different way. When we're launching anything new, it's all about love. But I mean, it's about love for particular people that you've gotten to know and for whom you have a great bond of affection, to use our Church of England language, but really mean it. And so it's all about love for individuals that empowers us to take on courageous behavior. It starts with love. I'll stop there. Thank you, Clive.
Beautiful.
Thanks, Tom. I'm glad to be here with y'all too, and it's nice to see some faces of people who have participated on the redevelopment, the revision and renew side of things, and to know some of you from there and some of you from other walks of life. But some of this is going to sound like not particularly innovative or wowy, but on the redevelopment, we talk sometimes about the difference in church planting and redevelopment. Church planting being starting something from where there's nothing, and redevelopment being starting from something that exists and trying and seeking and discerning and daring to move it somewhere else into some other way of being, some new awareness. And it's often hard to get people to take the risk necessary for that. And for some, it often starts out as just recognizing that they need and they want to be related to other people, other organizations in their neighborhood. And so one of the things people talk about is collaboration and working alongside of people and getting to know people. And this year, it feels like that word collaboration has become not nearly as bold or nearly as prophetic as we need. And so we're moving more and more in terms of talking about interdependence, that it's not just about like a one-off collaboration. It's not about a transactional process where we're working with another organization or partnering with a neighbor on something, but are we able to actually see ourselves in a web of life where we not only need each other, but we flourish when those connections are nurtured, and the more that we graft, build the ecosystem necessary for that interdependence, the better off we all are. In good times, it brings us greater joy. In bad times, it can be a matter of survival. And so I think our current climate change issues kind of point that out, the fact that neighbors need neighbors and need to know neighbors sometimes. So I think moving from collaboration to interdependence is a big shift for us this year.
Wow.
Thank you, Katie.
Wow, Steve, and that has me thinking about my first learning and maybe a little bit of a different way. So what I wanted to name is my friend Erin Dira helped me think through this a good bit. I'm somebody that I have futuristic somewhere in my top 10 Clifton strengths, and I also kind of like having a generalized universal field theory of everything, including the future. So I spend a lot of time thinking about what is the future of the Episcopal Church and of the work that we are doing together. And what Arundira got me to think about differently is, well, maybe it's actually futures with an S at the end. And I think I agree with, I can kind of wrap my head around that a bit more. There's certainly futures for church planting. There's no one recipe for this church planting. And there's, I think that maybe one of the, I don't know if it's a dark side or not to this idea of Episcopal futures, or if it's just an observation, is that there are some of those futures that seem to be growing less interdependent, like you said, Steve. I'm noticing more of a chasm between folks who are still following in the path of the old traditional models of church and are very highly invested in it and actually succeeding at it, and people who are looking to a new missional future. And it feels like the wires are crossed and cut in some places. Kind of like the chasm is growing between institutional religion at all and the way that people are actually living their lives. So that's one of my wonderings, is what comes of that? What comes of that chasm?
Ooh, I love that. What comes of that chasm?
Back to you, Tom.
Yeah, I've been talking about this tipping point in congregations. Steve and I are starting a new cohort of congregations in Diocese of Atlanta, and in anticipation of it, I've been talking to leaders that I know from Atlanta. And the wondering is, what are those practices by which we help groups of people reach a tipping point where they experience longing and desire more acutely than the fear of loss? And I've been talking about it for a while, but the learning for me is not so much, is there a fulcrum or a tipping point? The learning point, or the out loud wondering, is, if we start from a place of love, could it be that our primary work as leaders is to nurture longings that are felt, experienced, felt more acutely than the fear of loss that inhibits us? So many times you all are doing amazing ministry in a culture, or from within a culture, that has come to the place where it expects leaders to be inhibitive, regulatory, controlling, enforcing governance, putting things down, pushing down, tamp it down, curb your enthusiasm. When in reality, to lead groups, my sense is that there's such a need for us to develop the capacity to nurture longings felt more acutely than the fear of loss that has inhibited us. So there's paying much more attention. Some of the congregations we're asked to intervene with cannot muster that anymore. They cannot muster longings. And so they may not have access to decisions they think they can make at this point. It's too late if they can't find desire and longing. So I love Joel too. I love Simeon standing on the temple steps waiting for the Messiah. I love all of that. But those are exceptional people that late in life, after satisfying themselves with the monotony of institutional religious life, can access desire and longing that compels them to take courageous action. It stays right close, right here in my heart. I'm looking more and more through that lens at the world that we inhabit. Back to you, Steve.
So on the redevelopment side of things, it can feel sometimes like we're little moles tunneling under institutions, hoping that someday something will happen and shift, and maybe somebody will notice us without, whacking us on the head in the front lawn, but maybe someday we'll be able to shift the landscape. And so we've developed some really good, bottom up kind of work, very asset-based community development, a lot of processes where we get congregations to practice mutuality in relationships. We believe really firmly that a small group within a church can shift the dynamic of a church and then shift the relationships in a neighborhood and create partnerships that maybe the diocese will notice, and maybe someday other people will notice what the diocese is noticing. So we believe that is a real possibility, and we're very faithful to that work. The new piece is that trying to be increasingly relational, savvy, aware of places where there is life at the top, where dioceses are hungry for these conversations, and not just because it might be difficult to figure out what to do avoiding those, but really trying to engage those leaders who are wanting to create space for innovation and possibility, not just for the sake of innovation and possibility, but because they firmly believe that there is a brighter future ahead if we can only dare to step into the relationships and the risks that are necessary for that. So I would say that one of our learnings is beginning to have increasingly have more conversations with diocesan leadership and maybe people in other leadership in other denominations to kind of begin to talk about this more deliberately. How do we nurture and create spaces for the work that we feel called to on the local church level? And you might hear more about that by the end of this call. I'm not sure, but there are some opportunities coming up.
That's good, Steve. The lethargy is real. You know, I get on Zoom calls and phone calls with clergy, not every day, but more often than I expected in this role, who are tired, who are burnt out, who aren't really sure, what the path for, who don't feel the energy that they think that they are supposed to feel in their current call. And it reminded me of how sometimes you'll have a virus, or I find this, like sometimes I'll have, and it's not, it's not the stomach flu, and it's not pneumonia, and I don't really even have any sinus pressure or anything. It's just for 2 or 3 days, I feel like I just can't really do anything. Like I don't really have any motivation. And I find myself over those 2 or 3 days thinking there's something wrong with me. I've lost my passion. I'm lazy. I just can't get motivated. And then on the 4th day, it all lifts and I go back to normal. And I'm like, oh, my body was fighting off some kind of, little bacteria or virus or something. And that's what was going on. I think these last 3 years have been a little like that. And I see it with the, clergy loneliness. Gosh, why am I so lonely? Why do I feel like there's no path forward? Or I've got all this motivation. Why is my bishop not interested in what I'm talking about? And so I think, one of the antidotes to that, there's many antidotes, but one of the antidotes I keep thinking of over and over is a real need in our church for more specific vocational discernment. We offer vocational discernment retreats really around missional leadership that bring people together who are actually thinking the same way and have energy in the same direction. And why don't we do that, for many of our lay leaders and clergy? So that's one place I found an antidote. I'm wondering where there might be others to this lethargy that we are feeling, and what about it is as actually natural and we can cut ourselves some slack about.
I love that. That's good. Honest, a long, loving look at the real, as Steve calls it. Thank you for that, Katie. Another one, a learning for me, is a revival of a learning that used to be really important to me, and I kind of lost track of it over the last few years. Starting in 2016, this office has gone through some pretty amazing upheaval. We went through some changes in leadership and management that were really difficult to manage. And so some of the things I used to say regularly just sort of faded away, and this is one of those. And it is the simple claim that we are the stories that we tell. And I'm going to give you part B to that in my next one. But what I mean by that is that pay attention to what people are telling you about themselves. Pay attention to what I'm telling you about myself via the stories that I choose to tell. now that we're working in congregations on a systems level, oftentimes I hear myself saying, let's pay attention to the stories we're telling each other here, because we become what we talk about, but we give ourselves away by the stories that we choose to share. So when we're working with a new congregation, we pay a lot of attention to the stories that their leaders tell us, that they tell. What are the principal, I know this is an overused word, but it still works. What are the principal narratives that run through the conversations that you hear from groups of people? They tell you more than the signs tell you or the parochial report tells you. They tell you everything about the future possibilities that congregation is tending. So we are the stories that we tell. Language shapes everything. We are the people that we talk ourselves into. So it's about being really careful and mindful about the stories that we tell as well. But I'll come back to that next time around. Thank you, Katie. Back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Tom. I wonder what the stories of our what some of the stories are of our institutional churches that have been in existence a while, are that hold us back in our own small understanding of what's possible. And, we encounter that a lot when we're working with the churches. We want them to believe that they believe their best days are ahead of them. And they might say that they believe that, but they haven't had a lot of evidence in some of their experiences. And churches often still feel like, in terms of redeveloping congregations, like it's up to them to do it all. Like somehow their neighborhood really needs them, and they are the only harbingers of resources of God's love. And so to get churches to think that, wow, what God is up to and is most alive may not have anything to do with their church and be happening outside the walls is a real eye opener for some people, because they've told themselves the stories that they are the light of the world and that they have to share the light, that the light's not out there anywhere. And one of the things that I want to lean into in the coming year is to invite churches to think about what is so big, what is their particular charism and based in their values, their dream that is so big that they can't possibly do it by themselves. So they have to, in order to see this dream come to fruition, they have to find partners in the community. And it might be that they actually join someone else who's already doing this work that they just haven't considered as a partner yet, or as a collaborator, or somebody in this interdependent network, but something that's so big that they couldn't possibly do it, and go and join that, or go and invite other people into that possibility, to sort of think big instead of small, to kind of go huge with regard to God's dream and vision in partnership with other people. So that's something I'm curious about.
That's powerful, Steve. I'm going to name one more that I feel is controversial, but it's controversial within me too. So I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Church planting can be completely free. And I hate saying it because I feel like I've spent the last couple of years talking to bishops and canons and trying to convince them that if they want to see successful church planting and missional leadership happening in their diocese, they're going to need to plan for at least, an expenditure of $300,000 to $500,000. And I love complaining about how my church plant here in Birmingham didn't quite get to where I wanted it to go because it was underfunded. But there's so many examples that come to mind. I was at the Japanese American National Museum a few months ago and just got and St. Mary's Mariposa, which is a historically Japanese American congregation, and I got to see the travel altar that Reverend John Yamazaki took with him into the Japanese internment. And it just left me with this, wow, church doesn't cost anything, all I needed was a piece of wood, kind of in the shape of a TV tray, and was able to celebrate the Eucharist for 3.5 years, in the desert of California. We've got, probably hundreds of church plants that really are something like we might call a micro church or a house church or a dinner church that are already happening across this denomination and across the country. Thousands, maybe, if you talked about many different denominations that are happening for free. And that's not an observation that church planting should be free. I've had CFOs tell me that church planting should be free, right? That church planners should be willing to work for no pay. And I'm not, that's not where I am either. But when we have a system that is lethargic and that is struggling to manage decline and disappointment and change, maybe it's just comforting to know that there's ways that we can bring about this kingdom in terms of, Christian community and being Jesus's hands and feet that don't require that institutional support or resources, and at least in the amounts that we are originally hoping for.
I love that, Katie. And I'm so looking forward to the day when CFOs say, I should be able to work for free, just like church planters should. That'll be a great day. We'll celebrate. Yeah. So thank you for that. And learning from you and David Perkins and several of you, Debbie Royals, this goes back many years between us. Oftentimes the work we're called to do is disruptive, and it actually highlights the conflict that is already there. We don't have to introduce it. It's already there. Conflict between values, conflict between stated values and real values. My point is, often this work of either redeveloping or launching new ministries is intentionally disruptive. It's disruptive to the status quo. It's disruptive to the cultural norms that keep us in bondage personally and collectively. And so there's something lovely about mature leadership that is comfortable with the nature of conflict, the presence, the reality of conflict, and consistently chooses to not act as though it was about them.
I think I heard my name called.
Yeah, David, you did actually.
Well, I have just a response to what you're saying. I'm in the office at Christ Episcopal in Valdosta, Georgia today for the last time. This is my last day. Head back to Virginia tomorrow. And a couple of learnings for me that have not necessarily been new, but have been reinforced in this interim: the power of conversation and community to affect change.
Mm-hmm.
And you know about this process that I do in interims of Holy Conversations that I got from Kay McLaughlin at Diocese of Lexington and have been using ever since. And the second learning that has really gotten reinforced here is that people are yearning and hungry for not just reconnection, but for something new. And this interim has been a unique blend of reinforcing some traditional structures and adding something new. That they have really surprised me at how well they took to. And I was having dinner the other night with a mutual friend of ours, Walter Hobgood, and his wife Gail, who worship here when he's not off doing an interim or supplying somewhere. And he made the observation that had not occurred to me. It was an affirmation that I had been able to engage in issues that were conflictual in the parish without getting caught up in the conflicts.
Nice.
Which was a really nice thing to hear.
That's beautiful, David.
Yeah. So my two learnings that have gotten reinforced are the power of community conversation to effect transformation, and the appetite people have, the yearning for something new.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. all the more reason for us to get over and get comfortable with the nature of conflict as being part of our human existence. And so for me, that means personally acknowledging that at any given moment, I have to manage my own ambivalence, internal conflict, and the reality that we live in paradox. I'll stop there. Back to you, Steve.
Well, I only came with 3.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I think we've gone around 3 times. And this is probably a good, there's actually several hands raised, a good moment to open the floor and say, what learning would you share with us? We'd love if a few people would be willing to speak out, raise hands and speak out, but also if you're somebody who processes thought by typing, or if you'd be willing to maybe type some thoughts in the chat box, that would really help us as well. Robin, did you have a hand raised? Would you share a learning with us?
Okay, so I would like to go back to your questions at the beginning when you asked what is the future of the Episcopal Church or the church planting. Okay, I would like to say the future is our hands. It depends how we manage it. We manage it. Okay, I would like to decide to say that because I just started a new church planting. So it's just a new beginning, new start. For example, last Sunday, I let the young people to do the modeling thing in the church. About 2-3 months, I don't even ask them to come to worship. But last Sunday, I tried something with them. I invite them to come to worship. And they asked me, Father, are we going to do the same thing the other church, the old church I used to do? I said, what you asking? No, if you're going to do the 3 readings, you're going to do all of this. No. And so also, are we going to allow us to preach? I said, why not? Why not? You can preach. And so at the beginning, I didn't start with the spiritual thing. I let them do what they want to do. And after that, I introduced them to the spirituality, to do the service, to attend the service. Also, I realized no one is autosufficient. So I need you, you need me. We need the traditional church, and the traditional church needs us. So for the new year, I try to create a spirit of friendliness. The spirit of friendliness. What I want to say that with that. For this year, I just beginning with maybe something new. Is to start a basic Creole class for those who open to help the community to learn Creole class. I start the class in Bradley Beach, and I have about 17 people who want to learn Creole in order to help the community, to help the Haitian. So I know it is very important to Haitian people to learn English. I think it's also important to other people, those who want to work to do the ministry, to also to learn Creole. And this year I'm going to extend that not only on Bradley Beach, so I'm going to extend that to Asbury Park, Elizabeth, and someplace else. What I find important, because it's very important for communication, for exchange, to help others, to open with others, to accept others, to be more tolerant, to be more patient with others.
Mm.
That's what.
That's such
so
a
I would
good
like to share with you.
living example, Robin, of what Steve was saying about interdependence earlier. I really love that. Yeah. Debbie, you had put something up here a little bit earlier in the chat box. Oh, leaving room for the spirit. Yeah. Grief and healing in community mirrors the patterns of personal grief and healing. Focus on the movement of the community and not a timeline of strategic planning. Be present in the grief and use that as a guide to gatherings. Debbie, are you still? Yeah, I see you. Is there anything else you would want to say about that learning?
Well, I think the most important thing for me this year has been that, you know, I really had a lot of enthusiasm and, you know, some of you already know, Tom knows, I kind of go for it when I have that sort of wound up and I had the backing of the diocese and it seemed like everything was in the cards. And then in October, August, when the Pope made his visit to Canada for Indigenous people, it was like the entire, everything that I had started constructing just crumbled. And it crumbled because of the deep grief that was stirred up. And it honestly looked like for August, September, well into October, this wasn't going to happen. And I just was devastated, right? Because I had so much of an investment in it myself. And, you know, selfishly, because it's good for me. If it's good for the Native community, it's good for me to have a community that looks like me, acts like me, talks like me, prays like me, you know. But I really began to just let the sort of dribble of folks starting to come back in and having conversations just sit in the tension. A lot of it was being directed at me because I'm a priest in the Episcopal Church. And, you know, the Native people don't look at any denomination as being the culprits, but all denominations get to share in their grief equally. And it just was so incredible that in a very unstructured, unplanned, really holy moment at the beginning of November, end of October, everything just started bubbling up again. So much so that I had struggled to have co-leaders on my team that were consistent, and they just all came together with like, here's what we can bring to the table, here's what we can bring to the table, here's what I'm willing to do. And so I think letting ourselves be present, that sometimes grief is what is the soul opening experience that brings people to God. I've known in my head, and I've learned it many times over, but each time I learn it again, it feels like a reminder that I've somehow forgotten that God speaks to us in our vulnerability. And as you said, Katie, you know, being lethargic or, you know, even grief stricken, you know, is sometimes an opening. It can actually be something hopeful, not something that's going to lead us to death. So I am feeling like there is light and life in Four Winds, and it will happen. It's like now I have to like ramp up my energy to catch up again, because I had gotten so low that now I'm just like, okay, they keep going. I need to get on board here.
Debbie, thank you. That's important for me to hear today, and probably for several other folks on this call to hear today. Oh, the hope and grief. What else? What are some other learning you're taking with you from this last year? Brian O'Rourke.
Hello. My learning this last year is self-care for me. I'm a caregiver at home and was the chaplain at a retirement community going into COVID, and I burnt out. And I do those assessments. I led caregiver support groups, and I would always do those caregiver assessments. I talk about burnout, and I was like the 10 on all those. I look at, oh, but I'm doing good things. I'm just gonna keep on trucking, and I hit the wall. And so from 2001 to 2002, I took some time off and have taken time to sort of structure my life newly and to really incorporate self-care in a new way, not just I'm going to do self-care, but I'll be working and thinking work while I'm doing my self-care, or, the multitasking, but really set aside time for my spiritual care and self-care. I play golf. I hadn't played golf in 10 years. I started playing golf again. It's been absolutely wonderful. And so now I'm the cortisol from all the stress is slowly sort of seeped out, and my brain's functioning again, and I'm seeing new things, and I'm excited, and I'm seeing people very lethargic and tired, and I understand that, but just being with the grief and giving yourself that time, at least from my learning, is just so important to allow for this creative expression. And now I love the beginning, Katie, when you talked about, what was it, an adventure that you didn't expect to be on. My life is totally, I never thought I'd be a chaplain. I was a chaplain for 5 years, and now I'm exploring how to create small ministries inside of retirement communities and really bring spirituality and start to develop that. So I started one in 2022. And now I'm going to, look at starting more. And I got this energy from the self-care. And so that's my learning from 2022 is self-care. So.
Oh, that's fantastic, Brian. Thank you. Thank you for being real.
I can jump in if my dogs don't bark at the mailman intermittently. My name's Olivia Hamilton. I'm in Cincinnati. I was relating to what you were saying, Brian. I had worked as a hospital chaplain in a psychiatric institution for kids for about 5 years, and then left that because I was really burnt out, and am now working on planting a worshiping community for foster, adoptive, and kinship families, of which my family is a part. The learning that crystallized for me happened a few weeks ago. I was actually asked by our foster care agency to be on a panel about, for other foster parents. The topic was creating relationships with birth families or first families of the children that you foster. And I was touched because they thought like, oh, you're expert at this, like you should come speak to other people. And I was like, oh man, like I have no idea what I'm doing. It's so complex. There's so many, like for me, spiritual, ethical questions that keep me up at night. And like, I wish I had a flow chart that would just tell people like, this is what you do when this happens. But I guess the learning for me is that all through my formation in seminary and formation for the priesthood, there's this kind of buzzword or hot topic around like boundaries in ministry. And I think self-care is part of that. And I feel like what I've been discerning is that those things, how do I put this? It's like boundaries and self-care and concepts around those things are like such a privilege, and that a lot of the folks that I'm walking alongside, journeying with, ministering to, however you want to phrase that, that's not necessarily the framework that they're looking through. And so for me to say, like, this is the boundary that I'm going to draw in this situation with this family that's like really on the edge in a lot of ways, or this mom whose children have been put into foster care or whatever, it's like that framework that was so drilled in no longer serves me. And I need to have, so it's like almost like that was the letting go, that framework that no longer fits. Not to say that those things aren't important, but it's just like, it's like I need to translate into a way of, and that's why I really like the language around interdependence versus collaboration. Is it like, it's not as clinical sounding. It's much more like we are doing something together and we don't have a script for it, but we believe and we're compelled to keep going. And I was on this totally secular panel, but it was like the only thing I could think to say to this group of people who are like, how do you have better boundaries with birth families? It's like, as a person of faith, and I said this on this secular panel, which was kind of awkward, but whatever, it's like, because it's true, it's me, as a person of faith who would stake my life on the claim that resurrection is real and life after death is possible. How can I not meet a birth family or, you know, any number of people that I might encounter with that resurrection mindset? How could I say, this is who I am at my core, and this is what I believe at my core, but I'm not willing to believe in second chances and resurrection in a very relational, interdependent way when it comes to like people that are on the margins, so to speak. So I don't know if that's like a half-baked thought. You're getting just like a, I don't know, stream of conscious a little bit, but it's really around is the concept of boundaries and self-care. How do I make those fit for the context that I'm actually in? And what is the, I guess if we're talking about this tension between institutional church and the trappings of institutional church, like what can the church learn about real raw relationship that emerges when you're walking alongside folks for whom boundaries and self-care are not the hot topics?
You make me remember, Olivia, that we're in this uncharted territory where technology has changed those boundaries, the desire to move from a sort of colonialistic missional mindset to a relational missional mindset has challenged those boundaries. Even our resolution from General Convention that prioritizes church planting with people who have historically been underrepresented in the Episcopal Church. You know, that means you're going to run into different cultural and socioeconomical and ethnic, you know, ways of drawing boundaries. And they're not going to be what the Episcopal Church is typically used to. Yeah. We have time for one or two more. If anybody'd like to offer up a learning from the last year. Michael.
I'm just reflecting on what Olivia said, and I'm wondering if, you know, part of the transition we're seeing is from churches being place-based to having perhaps other operating principles around them. I read an essay in the last 6 months from, I think, a bishop from Australia who said, we need to get back to parish churches that are in a particular neighborhood, and that's how they're understood. And I don't want to say that that's wrong, but I think that what Olivia is talking about introduces that you can do that. You can have them based in a neighborhood, but you can also have a church that's based by the experience of foster parents or by, you know, what it means to be doing, looking at ecology and things like that. There's a lot of different ways to be orienting a church, and I just Olivia, I want to thank you for speaking to that, because it's now kind of making me think, well, gee, I've been thinking about it from a geographic framework, and there's all sorts of other ways I can be looking at the same kind of issue.
Yes, amen, Michael. Amen. Anybody else? Suzanne, was that a hand raise?
Yeah, it is. One of the biggest things that we have learned from this past year's activity is that critical need to build capacity into a wider group of individuals who are on this journey with us. And I think I intuitively thought that was, going to be part of the deck when we got started on the discernment work that we're doing, but it's become really a front and center. And it's really exciting because we're starting to see individuals kind of stepping into places that are new for them, and they're new for us, and trying some things. And we're going to keep on really focusing on that now in this next sort of 6 to 12 months, is how do we help individuals? It comes back a little bit to what somebody said earlier about the vocation and training for lay leadership, and also, that may turn into other kinds of call on their lives. But that first step is, how do we help them go on that journey and start that personal journey, and then support that as we're moving forward. So that's been, in the work that we're doing at Messiah and with our Korean community, a really big kind of aha moment that kind of all coalesced in December, I would guess, and we're starting to consolidate some ideas around it now.
Oh, that's beautiful. And what a great note to transition on. Just in the few minutes that we have left, I wanted to make sure that you know about several upcoming things that are happening through our office, Church Planting and Redevelopment. I mentioned, like 50 minutes ago, that one of the things we offer that we're really proud of are discernment retreats for people who are considering some kind of missional leadership. Whether that is a reimagining of an existing congregation, or the imagining and creating of a brand new faith community, or maybe like something in between, or something else. And Steve, I know that you have a virtual retreat coming up in February, and I have one coming up in March. So do you want to say just a little about the one in February?
Sure, I'm glad to. Thanks. So our February retreat, and I'll put the link to the FormStack registration, is going to be online. It starts on February 9th, and it's from 12 o'clock to 5 o'clock Eastern. So that's 4 consecutive Thursdays through March 2nd. It's $350. What I can tell you is that, we have certain a certain and unique perspective on what we want church redevelopment to look like as we move into the future. Less about how does the building look and how is everything beautiful, and more on how are we becoming increasingly relational in the way that we do ministry. And so that's kind of the purpose of this retreat, is to help notice the skills and gifts and strengths of people who show up. So we would love to have you if that turn is something of interest to you, or if you know of someone. So I'll put the link in the chat. Thanks, Katie.
Beautiful. And so that is somewhat more oriented towards congregational redevelopment. We also have retreats that are in a very similar format, but more specifically for potential church planters. So folks who are starting with nothing or very little and creating something new. So, okay, so good. Steve put the February link in the chat box. I just put a link to the, we have a March event online and a May event in person. And you'll find that info in the chat box. And then the last thing I wanted to call out for you is we're taking a little bit of a different approach to supporting our new Episcopal community leaders, or our AKA our church planters in this triennium, and launching a pilot series of cohorts that are meant to be just places of mutual understanding and learning and sharing with some great facilitators. And they're on some of the topics are a little more generic, the collaboratory for new Episcopal communities. Some are a little more specific, communities with folks exploring a new monasticism. And another example is new communities with people in unhoused populations or other marginalized populations. So I believe in all the facilitators that are leading these, coordinating these, and you can find a little more info on them in the chat box. I think the deadline is February 6th or something like that. So you got a couple of weeks to consider registering. Oh, and Patty, yes, these are absolutely, all of what we have just said is open to lay leaders or ordained leaders. We're finding that more and more in this missional work, that our clergy do not have all the gifts it's going to take to lead into this missional future. So absolutely, yes. Okay, I think that we are finished with this time together, but as usual, we will say goodbye, and then I'll leave the Zoom space up for another 5 or 10 minutes, just if there's anybody who wants to stay on and ask a specific question, or bring up something specific that's occurred to you throughout this conversation. And we will regather February, the 3rd Thursday, and David Perkins is going to take us away with some conversation on anger and how it presents itself in this work, but you'll get that through our email updates. Thank you all.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank
Katie, and
you,
Steve.
David. Thank you. Good to see you, Isaac.